had a series of conversations recently with a friend about the idea of delayed gratification. And I wanted to see if I could expound a little bit on that topic and talk about how we value things in general. So, when we say delayed gratification, we mean the ability of someone to wait to receive the thing that they want and also to make ranked choices and to appropriately place in priority things that will lead to receiving those outcomes at the expense of lesser things. So there's a pretty famous experiment in psychological realm of things where you conduct an experiment with kids and you have them sit there and you say, you put a cookie in front of them and you say, you can have this one cookie right now, or if you wait for an hour, you can have like 10 cookies. And it turns out that the vast majority of people will eat the cookie immediately, and very few will wait to receive an obviously much better thing because it's one to one. It's 10 cookies or it's one cookie. And as they track those people over time in their lives, it was a long-term study. They realized that that was sort of a character attribute that stayed fairly constant. People who, as kids, were able to wait in order to receive a better version of something, that played more openly and played out through their lives in every other aspect of your life, because it turns out that your character qualities um, are generalized to you. They're not just for specific situations. And so the problem was the kids that ate the cookies immediately weren't willing to wait for a better thing. So, one aspect of valuing things appropriately is an inability to wait. It's a lack of patience, it's a lack of perseverance, it's a lack of being willing to endure something unpleasant. And maybe we don't typically think of just waiting as enduring something unpleasant, but it is unpleasant to not have your physical desires met immediately. So, usually when you're trying to teach someone that they need to endure longer in order to receive something better, the part that you first start working on is the waiting part, the patience part. How much work are you willing to do in order to get what you want? So, and these are all aspects of faith. Wanting something, the desire, is an aspect of faith. The path that you've devised that will get you what you want, and walking that path is an aspect of faith, and it eventually culminates in you receiving what you desire and turning that faith into knowledge. In other words, you now know the path in order to get what you want or what you wanted. So we start by helping people learn that there are a whole host of good things that they should want that are not available without the ability to wait and to do things for a longer period of time. If you make a normal amount of money, you can put whatever number you want on that. But if you make a normal amount of money, there's a whole host of things you can't buy unless you're willing to save up in order to buy them. And we'll just leave the whole buying things on credit thing out of this because that's its own can of worms and is obviously a trap most of the time. So the next thing that happens, though, once you've decided that you can master this idea of persevering in an unpleasant, uncomfortable, painful situation at the expense of what you'll get when you endure through that path, the next piece of the equation is you need to have your desires for what you're enduring improved and increased. And this also happens, and this is also part of the experience of faith. So it is not uncommon if you have a goal for something that you want, if you have a desire and you are walking down that path, it is not uncommon for someone to present you, or for something to present you, or for God to present you with a way to receive what you want in a better way, or to show you that the thing that you wanted isn't worth it anymore, to give you sufficient reasons that you shouldn't go after it, at least not in that way. And this is a great blessing too, even though it might feel like you're being told that you just wasted a whole bunch of time and effort, and nothing could be further from the truth. Like when you are enduring towards a goal in faith, the only outcomes are positive. You either get what you want or find something better that you should go for instead. And you have something that you can cross off your list that you don't need to desire anymore. And so that's just improvement both ways. There's not really any loss in that process. The loss comes when we stubbornly refuse to change our minds based on the new evidence that we've seen. So it's a cycle of learning to prefer the longest term benefit. So the greatest benefit at the longest term at the expense of how you feel short term in the moment. And that when you've done that, of increasing the things that you desire, or improving your desire such that you're going after better and better things and being taught what those things are. So one of the best ways to see how this principle plays out in the scriptures is in studying the miracles of Jesus. And so let me see if I can explain this and help you to see how these two things, this delayed gratification, what it's supposed to teach you, and how you're supposed to learn about it from the miracles in the scriptures. So oftentimes when we're talking about miracles, we're talking about explicitly physical miracles. There are things like healing the sick, healing the blind, helping the lame to walk. You know, it is a change to someone's physical body that has been hurt or maimed, or maybe it hasn't worked right since birth. And there's a good amount of alleviation of suffering. For example, with the cleansing of a leper. And it is focused on someone's physical body. Now, I want you to think in terms of greatest long-term benefit. There's two aspects of your being. There's your physical body and there's your spirit. One of those things is eternal, which is your spirit. The other thing, your body, exists for the period of your mortal life. As you know, as long as you're alive, you have it, and when you die, you no longer have it. And so any miracle that is performed on someone's physical body, no matter how glorious or wonderful it is, has an end date as soon as that person dies. And so you say, okay, well, I mean, that doesn't sound so bad. I still want to, I'm blind. I still want to be healed of my blindness. And fair enough. I'm not saying there's not any improvement necessary or of necessity in the healing of a physical ailment, but it is not something that is of the greatest, longest term. Something that affects you eternally in your spirit is a much greater blessing than something that just affects your body. And so it's much harder for people to even want to change the things that are wrong in their spirits, or the things that can be changed in their spirits. And oftentimes it is a spiritual problem that's actually leading to whatever physical ailment that somebody might have. Not all the time necessarily, because sometimes, like I said, you might just be the man in John 9 where you're born blind. And they actually even, or Jesus goes out of his way to call to attention the fact that the man who was born blind did not sin to become that way. So he did not have a spiritual problem, and neither did his parents, but that man was born blind so that the works of God could be made manifest in him. And what an interesting phrase to think about. However, there are plenty of things in this life um, that are that where the symptoms are physical suffering, and they have their root in a spiritual issue. And so the true healing that needs to occur in order for someone to actually overcome that problem has to occur in the spirit. In other words, the thing that makes them who they are, their character, their spirit, their core essence of a being needs to be improved so that those things can be healed physically. Now, there are all kinds of beliefs and ideas around what this means from like a sort of like a supernatural perspective. I think we can set those things aside for right now. And though those things do happen and do exist, they are a subset of a larger idea here. And maybe we can see it if we use something like an addiction or something that's unhealthy, right? If you're an alcoholic and you crave in your body to drink alcohol and how it feels, what it makes you feel like, and you keep doing it even though you know it's terrible for you and it's having horrible effects on your body. The key to overcoming alcoholism has very little to do with treating the physical symptoms of alcoholism. So you might stop someone from drinking by removing them from all alcohol. So you put them in a rehab facility and it's impossible for them to get alcohol. So as long, if they get through all the initial stages of the withdrawal and all of that stuff, and so now their physical body is no longer craving the alcohol because it's been sufficient time for it to heal from that. But what is more than likely happening is in the spirit, the person is still craving that stuff. They still want the things that it makes them feel. They still want to hide from the problems they're refusing to face and have been attempting to mask through the use of alcohol in that way. And so the much greater healing has to come in the form of the person overcoming the thing that they are trying to hide with the consumption of alcohol. And that could be any number of things. It could be an inability to cope with what they feel like is a lack of love in their life, which is a desire and yearning to know more and of God and be nearer to God. And most of those types of things actually at the root of their problem is a lack of connection with the love of God. Now, it's much harder to help someone find that connection than it is to give them alcohol. And the same thing holds true for any other thing where you're seeking relief from how you are through some sort of physical triage, whether that's through pornography or, sexual overindulgence or something like that, or maybe you're overeating, or maybe you're angry all the time. So many of these things are actually at their deep root a spiritual issue that needs to be healed. And so getting back to physical miracles, oftentimes, well, just because somebody is healed of their ailment does not at all guarantee that they will be healed of their spiritual problem. The whole reason, not the whole reason, one of the very important reasons why Jesus performed miracles on people's physical bodies was because it helped them to see that he might have something even better than that. So one of the keys about why miracles are performed for people is to give them the idea that there's at least something this good. This person who just healed me of my forever problem, right? The man born blind, a great example of this. Jesus heals him of his blindness. Nobody had ever healed someone who had been born blind of his blindness and now he could see. Nobody believed it. They were besides themselves. The man himself, um, he took that improvement, and if you read through the story, eventually gets to the point where he's talking with Jesus, and Jesus talks to him about the Son of God, and the man says, "Lord, who is he that I should believe on him?" And Jesus says, basically, I'm talking with you right now. I'm standing right in front of you. And the man says, "Lord, I believe." And then he follows him. So in that instance, because he received his sight, he was willing to use that um, that evidence of the potential of something greater and act on it until he found something even better, till his desire was upgraded. He went from desiring to have his sight to desiring to be a follower of Jesus and do the works of Jesus, which is a much harder path, but a much more gratifying one. So, did that always happen every time Jesus performed a miracle for someone? Did they always immediately improve as people as well? Did they get better in the spirit as well as in the body? And unfortunately, the answer is actually no, and it's almost always no. This is the principle that's exemplified by the 10 lepers. 10 lepers go and they meet Jesus and he heals them, or he tells them to go to the priest and that they'll be healed, and they're healed as they go. And only one of the 10 come back to thank him. And it's that story is talked about as if it's a story about gratitude. And of course there's an element of gratitude in there, but the man that came back worshiped him. He realized that Jesus had something more than the ability to cure your leprosy. It's crazy to think that you could meet someone who can heal a problem that no one else can heal, and that they do that for you, and that your reaction is, "Cool, thanks," and then you just go about your merry life as if nothing's different. But that happens all the time. It happens all the time. And so, unfortunately, the physical miracles don't always have their intended effect. But the risk often is worth it, because there might be improvement. There might be eternal improvement in someone who receives a great outpouring of a miracle. What's another example of when Jesus tried to show people that the spiritual miracle was more important than the physical one? And then he used the physical one to bring them into a better understanding of what was possible. Well, in Mark 2, there's a story of a man who is sick with the palsy, as they say, and he can't walk. And his friends, desiring to get him healing, uh, they demonstrate their faith by breaking through the roof of this house and lowering the man down before Jesus. And this story is always talked about as if, it's about the friends' faith, and Jesus heals this man, and look how powerful Jesus is. And there is utility in a lot of those messages. But what actually happens in the story is that they lower the man down. Jesus sees the man and he says, "Son, thy sins be forgiven thee." He forgives the man's sins. Is the forgiveness of sins more or less beneficial than the healing of the palsy? And the answer is, of course, it's more, because it has the potential for eternal benefit. If the man chooses to never sin again, then he has received the ability to have eternal life, because the Lord has forgiven him of his sins, of things in the spirit. Now, when Jesus says that he forgives the man's sins, the people watching murmur and complain, and they say that, oh, what manner of man is this, that he blasphemes because he says he can forgive sins, like man can't forgive sins. And so Jesus, knowing that they were doing this, he says that he perceived it in his spirit. He says, okay, fine, you don't think that it's that I can forgive sins, and you don't, it's like the subtext is you don't understand how much more powerful and important that is, and it's hard for you to see. Okay, if you won't appropriately value that, then watch this. And then he heals the man of his palsy. But that wasn't the main miracle that the man was going after, or that wasn't the main miracle that Jesus wanted to give the people. He didn't want to just go around and heal people of their physical ailments so that they could be whole for the rest of their lives and stay the same type of people that they were before. He wanted to forgive their sins and to teach them to be better in their character so that their spirit could grow. And so it says, I think I have it up right here in verse 12. It says, and immediately he arose and took up the bed and went forth before them all, insomuch that they were all amazed and glorified God, saying, we never saw it on this fashion. And so he performed that to give them the idea that there was something more powerful there, that he could do better things for them, things that were harder to see, harder to perceive, and would have greater long lasting benefit. But unfortunately, most of them didn't do anything with that information. What's some additional evidence that it's more ideal to change the things about your spirit than it is to just have something in your physical body changed? Well, one of those, do you remember in Mark 9, where Jesus is preaching and he says, if thy hand offend thee, cut it off. It is better for thee to enter into life maimed than having two hands to go into hell. And if thy foot offend thee, cut it off. It is better for thee to enter halt into life than having 2 feet to be cast into hell. Or if thine eye offend thee, pluck it out. All of these things, he's clearly showing that if your preference, if you have to have a preference, your valuation of what is most important should be based on what is spiritually impactful and not on what is physically impactful. So it is much, much better to receive spiritual enlightenment, to change for the better in your character at the expense of your physical body, than it is to receive a miracle in your physical body and then change nothing in your spirit as a result. And that is actually the reason why many people did not receive healing that wanted it. And it's one of the reasons why many people don't receive healing today and want it. Because it would not improve things. It would actually make things worse. And God's not about making things worse. He only wants to make things better for us. So what's the key takeaway from all of this? There are so many things in our lives that we desire, and we might desire these specific miracles. I've heard Christian after Christian desire the gifts of the Spirit because they want to see those things happen. And again, maybe it's because they have some sort of ailment they suffer from. They'd like to receive less suffering, or they want to see a loved one receive less suffering. And those desires need to be upgraded. Desire to improve in the spirit. Desire to have more courage while facing your trials. Desire to have more peace and to demonstrate just how good God is despite your physical ailment. And then you found yourself a much greater gift. Don't be one of those people who only sought for loaves and fishes. The loaves and fishes were a miracle provided by Jesus. He showed those to the people so that they would see that he had something to tell them about. You would think that it would be obvious that if somebody showed you that they could miraculously make food, that you would go to him and say, can you teach me how to do that too? That wasn't what anybody wanted. He even offered it to them. He said, "You can drink my blood and eat my flesh and become like me." And they said, "Gee whiz, no thanks. I'd rather die, basically. I'm gone. I'm out of here." And that's the pattern that's repeated over and over again. But I promise you, it's much better to go into eternal life maimed than it is to receive a bunch of loaves and then become worse people for having rejected the greater example of light that could have been in your life. So I hope these things make sense and help, and happy to talk about it if anybody wants to talk in the comments.